The year was 1521, and the Ming Dynasty ruled China, stretching its reach across rivers, mountains, and bustling cities. To us, the ordinary folk, life moved to a rhythm older than memory. The markets clamor at dawn, the children chasing kites through dusty streets, the smell of rice and firewood mingling in the evening air. But above it all, looming like a shadow we could never touch, were the emperor and his court, distant and unknowable, their lives wrapped in silk and ceremony. The Ming Dynasty was proud and powerful. Its walls and cities were fortified, its armies disciplined, and its bureaucracy vast. The emperor, seated in the Forbidden City, held absolute power. Every decision, every law, every coin spent or taxed flowed through his hands, or at least through the hands of men who claimed to serve him. Yet for all their authority, there was something fragile about the throne. Power demanded constant vigilance. Court officials schemed in whispers, plotting against rivals. Ministers could rise and fall on a single day. And amidst all this, the emperor lived in a world that was at once splendid and suffocating, a gilded cage built of gold, incense, and ritual. I remember hearing stories from my parents and neighbors about the young emperor who had just taken the throne, Zhu Huzhao, though history would later call him the Jiajing Emperor. He was said to be a man unlike any who came before him, with obsessions that puzzled even the learned scholars of the court. He cared not only for the affairs of the kingdom, but for strange matters, like the search for immortality, the meticulous performance of Taoist rituals, and the endless study of alchemy. In a world ruled by duty and discipline, his mind wandered into mysteries most could never imagine. Life for people like me was humble and harsh, dictated by the seasons and the whims of the market. Every day we labored in fields, carried water from rivers, or sold goods from wooden stalls. Yet even in our modest lives, we could feel the emperor's presence everywhere, through the coins we used, the taxes we paid, and the soldiers patrolling the streets. And it was in this world of structure and hierarchy that the Jiajing Emperor began to indulge in his most curious whim, a desire to see, touch, and experience the life of ordinary people without ever stepping fully into it. I was still a boy when rumors began to drift to the villages about what he had built inside the palace walls. It was said that he had created a marketplace that was not a market at all, a world filled with goods and laughter, yet entirely staged. Merchants and villagers, all servants in disguise, played their parts as though they were real, and the emperor would walk among them, unseen, or perhaps playing along, imagining himself free in a world that was, in truth, only an illusion. To us, it sounded unbelievable. How could a man with armies, cities, and millions of lives under his command find fascination in pretending to walk among ordinary folk? And yet, the stories persisted, told by servants who had glimpsed the emperor observing his mini-world, noting every gesture, every barter, every laugh. In a time when life outside the palace walls was governed by survival, here was a man constructing a fantasy, brick by brick, stall by stall, to escape the very power that bound him. And so I grew up hearing these tales, wondering about the emperor who ruled from afar, yet longed so deeply to be near. The Ming Dynasty, with all its grandeur and discipline, provided the stage. The markets, the villages, the mountains and rivers, all of it existed as both reality and contrast to the world inside the palace. And it was in this world, at the edge of myth and history, that the story of the Jiajing Emperor's strange artificial market would unfold. A story not just of power, but of isolation, curiosity, and the human desire to step into a life that is not one's own. I first saw him from a distance during one of the rare public ceremonies in the city square. The Jiajing Emperor, Zhu Huzhao, was smaller than I imagined, but his presence was vast, commanding every eye and thought. The silk robes he wore shimmered like a river of fire in the morning sun, embroidered with dragons that seemed to crawl across his chest. He moved carefully, almost deliberately, as if aware that every step was measured, every gesture noted, and yet those closest to him whispered of a man unlike any ruler before, someone as strange as he was powerful. Even then, I could sense it. There was something in the way he held himself that suggested curiosity, obsession, and, perhaps, loneliness. It was said that he ascended to the throne at the age of 16, a boy suddenly surrounded by ministers, eunuchs, and guards, all waiting for his command. The weight of the empire was immense, but unlike other emperors who embraced their duties with ceremony and fear, Jiajing seemed restless, his mind forever wandering beyond the gilded halls and silk-covered floors. He became obsessed with life beyond the palace in ways few could understand. Stories filtered down to us about his endless pursuit of immortality. Taoist rituals performed late into the night, pills and potions crafted from strange herbs, prayers whispered to unseen forces. Some said he feared death. Others said he simply wished to conquer time itself. But among all these obsessions, the one that fascinated me most, the one that seemed almost absurd, was his desire to experience the life of the common people. Imagine for a moment a man who commands millions, who decides the fate of thousands with a single decree, yet longs to barter for rice and fish, as though he were just another villager. This was the Jiajing Emperor. To him, power had its limits. He could rule, yes, but he could not step outside freely. Fear of assassins, the strict rules of the court, and the constant watch of his ministers created walls even taller than the palace itself. And so he built a world where he could walk among us, unseen or disguised, pretending to be one of the people. The stories I heard painted vivid pictures. Inside the palace, he had constructed what looked like a bustling marketplace, complete with stalls, merchants, and even children playing. But every face was familiar, every laugh rehearsed. These were not real villagers. They were servants trained to mimic life, to create an illusion of the world outside. And yet for him, it was enough. He could stroll through the fake streets, touch the pretend goods, listen to the staged arguments of the mock merchants, and feel, if only for a moment, that he had escaped his golden cage. Some of the older villagers said it was not just curiosity that drove him. There was a certain melancholy to it, a loneliness that wealth and power could not remedy. He had every luxury, yet he lacked the simple freedoms we often take for granted. To experience even the smallest part of life outside the palace was, in a way, a rebellion against the very power that defined him. And perhaps that is why he devoted himself so completely to this strange pastime, building a world of imitation so precise it fooled even those closest to him. I often wondered what it felt like to be inside those walls, to walk those pretend streets, to barter for a piece of fruit or a scrap of cloth with the emperor himself. Did he laugh like us? Did he stumble over the same fears we did in the market, or was it all carefully orchestrated, a performance in which even he was only partially free? The stories never told that, but I could imagine it vividly, as though I had been there myself. Even his ministers found him strange. They whispered in corridors about the emperor's oddities, his strange rituals, and his obsession with the artificial market. Some feared him, Others laughed behind closed doors, but all agreed on one thing. Jiajing was unlike any ruler they had known, a man who had power beyond measure, yet sought the simplicity of a life he could never truly live. And so, as a commoner looking up at the towering walls of the palace, I realized something strange about power. It is not enough to command armies or collect taxes. Even emperors, in all their glory, long for something as ordinary as freedom, laughter, or a moment of normalcy. The Jiajing Emperor built a world to find that freedom, a world of illusion and play, and in doing so, left behind stories that would echo through generations, stories of a man who, despite having everything, wanted only what he could not have. It was during one of the rare market days near the palace walls that I first caught sight of it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Beyond the tall gates and watchful guards lay a courtyard unlike any I had ever seen. Streets lined with stalls, colorful banners fluttering in the wind, and merchants shouting, not too loudly, not too quietly, as if performing to an audience we could not see. It was a marketplace, yet it felt different, as though reality itself had been bent into some strange imitation of life. I edged closer, careful not to be noticed. The closer I got, the more I realized the truth. None of it was real. The merchants were dressed like us, but their movements were too precise, their gestures rehearsed. A boy sold vegetables with a smile that never faltered. An old woman arranged rice bowls in perfect symmetry. Even the sounds, the clatter of pots, the cries of the sellers were measured, deliberate, as though every note had been composed for the emperor's ears alone. And there, moving among them, was the man himself. I could not see his face clearly, but the way he carried himself betrayed him. He did not walk like a king, with the stiff pride of command. No, he moved lightly, carefully, as if afraid of breaking the illusion with a single misstep. Sometimes he would stop at a stall, pick up a piece of fruit, and inspect it as any commoner might. At other times he would watch a child chasing a stray dog, and for a moment it seemed that the emperor had forgotten he was an emperor at all. The market was meticulously designed. Each stall was arranged to mimic the chaos of real life. Yet there was an order beneath the surface that only the emperor could see. Fish lay on ice, glinting like silver in the sunlight. Bowls of rice and bundles of herbs were stacked neatly. Wooden carts, empty but polished, waited to be pushed. Everything was real enough to fool the eyes, but not real enough to demand work, sweat, or struggle. It was a world of simulation, a playground where the emperor could step in and out at will, safe from the dangers of the outside. I could see him talking to the merchants, asking questions about prices, about goods, even about the lives of their families. Yet I knew these were not real conversations. The servants had been trained to answer in ways that pleased him, to simulate the laughter, frustration, and surprise of real life. The market was not just a place, it was a performance. And he was both audience and actor, playing at a life he could never fully inhabit. Sometimes he would linger near the food stalls, picking up a piece of fruit or pretending to haggle over a basket of vegetables. He would taste, nod, and smile, as if these small victories, these small touches of normal life, were treasures to him. It was said that he spent hours here, watching, listening, sometimes interacting, but never fully becoming part of it. The world around him was a reflection of our reality, yet filtered through the lens of his desires, his obsessions, and his imagination. It was not merely curiosity that drove him. There was an almost childlike joy in the way he observed the staged chaos. He could laugh at a mock argument between two merchants, shake his head at the careful antics of a pretend child, or marvel at the arrangement of fruits and bowls. And yet beneath that joy, there was a sadness. One could sense the longing for a freedom that power had denied him, the craving to step into life rather than simply rule it. The market was more than just stalls and merchants. There were streets winding through courtyards, tiny bridges over shallow pools, lanterns hanging in rows, and the scent of incense mixed with cooked food. Birds were trained to flutter along wires. Children, actually young servants, ran errands, carrying baskets or shouting simple greetings. Everything was orchestrated, yet designed to feel spontaneous. I could see how the emperor would have felt both delighted and trapped, immersed in a life he could never fully share. As I watched from the shadows, I wondered how it must have felt to walk those streets as the emperor did, to touch the goods, speak with the mock merchants, and laugh at the staged chaos. Perhaps, for a fleeting moment, he could forget the endless weight of the empire, the scheming ministers, the constant rituals, and the fear of death. Perhaps, for a little while, he could feel normal, human, and alive. But I also understood the tragedy. Here was a man with everything: wealth, power, armies, and subjects. Yet he could not truly belong to the world he ruled. The market, brilliant and meticulous though it was only an illusion, a reflection of life, not life itself. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of all. Even the mightiest of rulers, who seem invincible and untouchable, are still bound by the same desires and loneliness that touch us all. I left the gates that day with a sense of awe and unease. The market remained behind me, hidden yet alive in my memory, a strange echo of a world that existed only for one man. And I carried with me a story I would tell for years. The story of an emperor who built a world of illusion, who played at life with all the innocence and longing of a child, and who, despite his power, could never truly step into the life he craved. Even beyond the mock market, stories of the Jiajing emperor's eccentricities spread like wildfire among the villagers. Some were whispered in fear, others laughed at in secret, but all painted a picture of a man whose mind wandered far from the ordinary. They said he was obsessed with immortality, dedicating hours each day to Taoist rituals, incantations, and strange alchemical experiments. Elixirs of powdered herbs, mysterious pills promising eternal life, and potions made from the unlikeliest ingredients were tested in the inner chambers of the palace. Some of the court doctors claimed his obsession bordered on madness. Yet to us outside the palace walls, it seemed both fascinating and tragic. A man with all the power in the world, yet consumed by fear of something inevitable: death. I remember hearing about the strange rituals performed in the dead of night. The palace courtyards, usually silent after sundown, would sometimes glow with lanterns, and chants echoed through the corridors. The ministers, eunuchs, and guards were ordered to participate in ceremonies that seemed as much about spectacle as devotion. And the emperor himself, always meticulous, always precise, would pace the ritual grounds, inspecting every detail, ensuring that the sacred rites were performed to perfection. To those of us who live by the sun and seasons, these acts felt alien, almost theatrical, like a world removed from the very earth we tilled. But the market was only one reflection of his eccentricity. Others spoke of his paranoia, the way he scrutinized officials and courtiers, forever wary of betrayal. Ministers could be elevated or executed on the merest suspicion. Some said he had a cold, calculating mind, capable of incredible foresight. Others whispered that his fears often led to cruelty, as if the weight of the empire and his own obsessions were too much for any single man to bear. And yet, even in this, there was a human element, a desire to survive, to protect oneself, to hold tightly to the only certainty one had, life itself. The emperor's obsessions extended to matters of appearance and ritual as well. He would often inspect his robes, the carvings on furniture, the layout of gardens, and even the alignment of courtyards. Every detail mattered. Every gesture was symbolic, every movement deliberate. To an outsider, it seemed excessive, perhaps even obsessive. But to him, it was a form of control, a way to impose order in a world that, despite his vast power, could never truly be tamed. Stories also spoke of his fascination with ordinary life, beyond the fake market. He would watch from hidden galleries, study the behavior of people in the streets, and even inquire about their struggles and joys. It was said that he sought the essence of life outside the palace, yearning to understand the rhythms of work, play, and survival. And yet, for all his curiosity, he remained separated from it by invisible walls of etiquette, security, and privilege. His interactions were always mediated, filtered, controlled, a life observed, but never lived. Some villagers laughed at the tales, imagining the emperor sneaking through the streets, pretending to be a commoner, tasting food, haggling over prices, perhaps even tripping over his own robes. Others shivered at the thought of a man with such power, whose obsessions could decide the fate of millions. But I could not help but feel a strange empathy. Here was a man with every luxury imaginable, yet he desired something as simple as the freedom to live unnoticed, to experience life as the rest of us did. It made me wonder about the paradox of power. To rule a kingdom is to hold the world in your hands, yet that very responsibility can imprison the mind and soul. The judging emperor, in all his extravagance and obsession, was a prisoner of his own status. The mock market, the rituals, the obsession with immortality, all of it seemed like attempts to reclaim a life that had been stolen by power. And in this, there was a lesson that even the mightiest men are bound by human desire, fear, and longing. As I watched the palace from the edge of the city, hearing the echoes of ritual chants or imagining him wandering through his staged streets, I realized that the judging emperor's eccentricities were not merely quirks. They were reflections of a man caught between two worlds, the world of absolute authority and the world of ordinary life. In his pursuit of immortality, in his construction of illusions, and in his obsession with observing life, he revealed a truth as old as power itself. No matter how high one rises, the desire to experience, to belong, and to escape remains unfulfilled. As I grew older and heard more tales from traders, scholars, and travelers, I began to see that the judging emperor's eccentricities were not entirely unique. Across distant lands, kings and emperors had often indulged in illusions, constructing worlds of their own design, though none quite like his. The strange mix of power, curiosity, and isolation seemed almost universal, a symptom of ruling without bounds. Take, for example, the stories of Nero in Rome. They say he built a golden house, a palace so extravagant that it defied reason. It had halls of gold, fountains of wine, and gardens filled with exotic animals. Nero could walk through it as he pleased, entertain guests, and create spectacles that blended reality and fantasy. To the common people, these were marvels, almost mythical in nature. But behind the glittering walls, the emperor lived in a world separated from the struggles of the streets. A gilded cage, much like our own emperor, but on an entirely different scale. Then there was Louis XVIII of France, the Sun King, whose palace at Versailles became a stage for grandeur and control. Every aspect of life there was orchestrated. The gardens, the dances, the meals, even the smallest gestures of the courtiers were directed to reflect the king's power. He created a world in which he could witness life and command loyalty, much as Jia Jing had constructed his fake market to observe his subjects. In both cases, the rulers sought to experience and control life simultaneously, blending reality and illusion in ways only the extremely powerful could imagine. And yet, one story struck me most. The concept of the Potemkin village in Russia. I had never been there, of course, but travelers spoke of villages that were built to deceive, mere facades of life meant to impress Empress Catherine II during her travels. The houses looked full of life. The streets seemed bustling, yet behind the walls, there was nothing. It was, they said, a stage for perception rather than reality. And when I thought of the Jia Jing Emperor's market, I realized he had created something similar. But instead of deceiving others, he was deceiving himself, crafting an illusion of ordinary life for his own eyes alone. From my vantage point outside the palace walls, it was clear. There is something universal about the desire to simulate life when reality becomes too complex, too dangerous, or too controlled. The emperor could not leave the palace safely, could not interact with ordinary people without the threat of betrayal or assassination. But he could build a miniature world, a world he controlled completely, where he could experience the joys, conflicts, and rhythms of life without risk. In that sense, he was both child and ruler, creator and observer, trapped by his own power, yet liberated by imagination. And there was a paradox in all of it. Power, it seemed, could give a man everything: wealth, armies, obedience, titles. But it could not grant him freedom. For the Jia Jing Emperor, even the smallest pleasures of ordinary life had to be manufactured, choreographed, and staged. In Rome, in France, in Russia, emperors and kings built illusions for themselves or for others. But in China, in the quiet halls of the Ming court, a man had built a marketplace of shadows, a world so vivid and so controlled that he could almost believe it was real. Almost. I often wondered how it would feel to walk those streets as the emperor did, to touch the fruits, speak to the pretend merchants, and laugh at the carefully staged chaos. And yet the more I imagined it, the more I understood the tragedy. This world of illusion could never replace the reality he longed for. He could observe, interact, and play, but he could never truly belong. The emperor, like all men of great power, remained a prisoner of his own status, a king in a kingdom of shadows, seeking the warmth and simplicity of life that lay forever beyond his grasp. As I walked back to my village, the sun dipping behind the palace walls, I realized something profound. The stories of other rulers from distant lands taught a lesson. Power isolates as much as it empowers, and illusions, no matter how beautiful, can never replace genuine life. And yet, the desire to create them, to play in them, is perhaps one of the most human impulses of all. A glimpse of longing and imagination that even the mightiest cannot escape. Even from the edge of the palace walls, I could feel the peculiar weight of the emperor's world pressing outward. The mock market, the endless rituals, the meticulous arrangement of every detail. It all spoke of a mind both brilliant and restless. Observing him, I began to understand something about the nature of power. It isolates as much as it elevates, and even the grandest walls cannot shield a man from desire. The market at first glance seemed like whimsy or childish play. Yet the longer I watched, the more I realized it was a carefully crafted experiment in control and perception. The Emperor could observe, interact, and influence, all while remaining safely distant from the dangers of the real world. Every stall, every laugh, every gesture was choreographed to satisfy his curiosity. A life simulated, yet vivid enough to feel genuine. I wondered how much of it was about observation and how much about escape. Power had trapped him inside golden walls, yet imagination allowed him to step beyond them. He could watch the rhythm of life, touch its fruits, and even play at ordinary existence, but always from a position of absolute control. Unlike us, who live life uncertainly, the Emperor could shape even the illusion to his liking. There is a strange universality in this. Even in our small lives, we create private worlds, stories, games, daydreams to escape hardships or imagine freedom. The Emperor's mock market was merely an amplified version of this impulse, a reflection of a human need magnified by wealth and isolation. What we do in whispers or imagination, he did in splendor and spectacle. Isolation seems to have been the engine behind his obsession. Ministers could not be trusted. Allies might betray. And even simple interactions with common folk carried danger. And yet, he longed to touch life in its ordinary form. The laughter of children, the aroma of fresh fruit, the bustle of a busy market. Unable to access these things directly, he recreated them, not for profit nor for show, but for the experience itself, fleeting though it was. Some may call this eccentricity, others madness. But I saw a more human truth. A man, even with all the power in the world, could not escape desire, curiosity, or loneliness. The Emperor's elaborate illusions were born from that longing, a longing to experience life as we do, unburdened, ordinary, fleeting, and imperfect. And there is beauty in that paradox. The market, the rituals, the careful orchestration, they were all artificial, yes. Yet they allowed him moments of connection, moments where the weight of empire fell away, and he could exist simply as a man among life, even if that life was a carefully arranged shadow of reality. Even after years of hearing tales about the Emperor, certain stories lingered in my mind like vivid shadows. One spoke of a day when he wandered through the mock market in disguise. His silk hood masked his face, yet his hands, those delicate, careful hands, handled fruit and vegetables as if he had never seen such things before. A merchant offered him a basket of oranges, and the Emperor, pretending to inspect them, handed over coins. The act was ordinary, mundane, but for him it must have been intoxicating. The thrill of living, even for a fleeting moment, as any of us could. Another tale tells of a child spilling a basket of vegetables. All around, the attendants froze, expecting the Emperor's wrath, but he bent down, helped gather the vegetables, and laughed quietly to himself. A small, human gesture in the midst of his immense orchestrated world. And sometimes, they say, he would stage arguments between his attendants or merchants in the market, observing carefully how each reacted, studying human nature in miniature performances. There are whispers of more elaborate games, too, mock festivals in the palace gardens, where he would direct every detail, the music, the colors, the roles each attendant played. The stories vary, of course, some exaggerated, some likely invented to amuse or caution the people. But in each there is a glimpse of a man striving to understand life beyond his gilded walls. To laugh, to act, to witness the unplanned joys of ordinary existence. Yet as these tales circulated, one truth became evident. The emperor's life was a paradox. He held supreme power, yet was confined by it. He could summon armies and reshape the empire, but he could not step into a street freely or touch life without artifice. His creations, the market, the games, the rituals, were attempts to bridge that divide, to experience life indirectly, through observation and orchestration. Historians may focus on his rigid rule, his obsession with ritual, and the sometimes cruel purges of ministers who displeased him. But I remember the humanity in the smaller acts. The laughter at a child's mistake, the joy of handling fruit, the fascination with a simple argument between two pretend merchants. Even in isolation, even amid obsession, the emperor sought connection, understanding, and glimpses of the life he had been denied. Over time, I began to see a broader lesson in his reign. Power, even the most absolute, cannot grant freedom or replace human experience. Control can command armies, build cities, or stage elaborate markets, but it cannot replicate the spontaneity, unpredictability, and small joys of ordinary life. The emperor's obsession with immortality, his meticulous recreations, and the playful worlds he constructed were attempts to fill that void, to reconcile immense authority with fundamental human longing. And there is a universal truth here, one that extends beyond emperors and palaces. We all create illusions, small rituals, private stories, imagined worlds. Children invent games. We dream of distant lives. We stage moments in our minds that reality may never allow. The emperor's illusions were extreme, yes, but the impulse was entirely human. The desire to connect, to experience, to feel life fully, even when circumstances make it impossible. Walking past a busy market today, I often think of him. The shouting of merchants, the laughter of children, the scent of fresh rice and firewood. It all brings to mind the mock streets he once wandered, the carefully choreographed chaos of his imagination. I imagine him there, watching quietly, smiling at the small dramas unfolding before him, living vicariously in the shadows of ordinary life. Perhaps that is his greatest legacy. Not the walls he built, the rituals he ordered, or the powers he wielded, but the reminder that all humans crave connection and experience, regardless of status or wealth. Even the mightiest emperor cannot escape longing, curiosity, or the simple joys of life. And perhaps, if we listen closely, his story speaks to each of us, to treasure the ordinary, to seek understanding, and to find freedom where it can be found, in laughter, in observation, and in moments of fleeting joy. And so, as I recount these tales, I do not see only a ruler lost in obsession or eccentricity. I see a man striving to live fully, constrained by circumstance yet determined to touch life as deeply as he could. His shadow falls not only on history, but on our understanding of what it means to be human, to create, to imagine, to long, and to find meaning even in the impossible.